Welcome back to the Faculty Factory podcast. I'm Kim Skorupski here at Hopkins, looking at a friend and colleague, Dr. Richard Edden. I'm so glad you're back with us at this reunion episode. Dr. Edden's episode was one of the most popular ones. It's episode number 189, entitled Writing, Co-Editing, and Productivity Guidance for Faculty. Dr. Richard Edden is a professor of radiology in the Department of Radiology and Radiological Science here at Hopkins. He also holds a position of Director of Post-Doctoral Fellows. And ever since Dr. Edden recorded this episode, he said he's been reflecting on the content and what he does, how he does it, with whom he does it, and has come up with some interesting nuggets about the writing co-editing process. And so you may have heard me on this podcast talk about my buddy Dave Usom and Richard Edden. The three of us deliver this course called How to Get the Paper Out the Door. So how to get the paper out the door, we do WAGs together. We have a lot of experience with writing and helping faculty members develop good skills and habits around producing scholarship. So Richard suggested he's going to start with a little overview of what the last episode talked about in case you missed number 189. And then he's going to share his interesting observations and reflections. So again, thanks, Richard, for being back on the podcast. I appreciate your generosity. Take it away.
Thank you very much for having me on. So last time we talked about this idea of co-editing that is one of the main ways that I work with fellows in my group. And it is a mode of drafting and revising drafts of papers where we sit together, and rather than just sending a Word document that will come back with red lines all over it, or digital red lines, we sit down and we go through that process together so that people can understand not just what the edits are, but why the edits are and what the thinking process is. And this has been a really powerful thing that I've been working on. It's really interesting to hear it contrasted with the get the paper out the door, because very much the ethos of that is don't not do it, and getting it done. Whereas this co-editing process is definitely a more time-intensive process from the point of view of the faculty. And one of the things that I've been thinking about since doing the podcast, I had sort of had some feedback which was more or less along the lines of, well, it sounds great, but I just don't have time to do that. And I struggle to find the time for all these things. And I think that is completely valid. Right. And actually in my own experience since doing the podcast, there have been times where there've been papers that have coming up on my desk where I can find time to redline it, but I can't necessarily find time to sit with somebody. And part of that is sort of asynchronous versus synchronous. I can get up an hour early and knock through a paper and send it back to somebody, but I can't necessarily ask them to, or haven't organized myself enough to ask them to. So there is definitely a time burden in doing it this way. And so one of the things that I've been thinking about and have been trying to enact is to say, well, this is not the only way of doing things. And what we're doing here is just providing ideas. We're not saying you have to act in a certain way. We're just saying these are some things that have worked for us. They may work for you, they may not. And so what I have done on some papers recently has been to work in both modes, to send some edits back when edits are needed quickly, and when I don't have time or we don't have overlapping schedules or people are traveling, this can work just fine. But there is, I believe, still additional benefit to be had from talking through why the edits are the way they are. And the benefits really are twofold. One is that this is, I think, a far superior training experience for the fellow to understand why the edits are coming through. And so this, I think, helps them in their future, helps them when they come to train fellows as faculty in the future. But also, it is an investment in my future of them within the group, because hopefully the next time they're writing the paper, they're doing so in a more prepared way, and they're thinking about the kind of things that I'm thinking about, and they're structuring things. Yes, so I think that that certainly I believe there is benefit, but this is not the only way of doing things. And for many people, this can't be the only way of doing things, just from a time perspective. And some of what we have to do is sort of aggressive time management, getting things done, moving things forward. And sometimes we can make time to invest in training, and it takes more time today, but maybe that saves us some time tomorrow, and invests in the training of our juniors.
Well, Richard, you're making me think that, well, thanks for sharing your thought process and how in your growth along the lines of this model. You're making me think about a recent experience we're doing here in the Office of Faculty at Johns Hopkins. We're revising the Silver Book. And at Hopkins, we have the gold book, the silver book, the blue book, affectionately called these books that are kind of like our Bibles. And the silver book, we're going to put it all online. It's not going to be in print format anymore. But there are about 12 of us on a Zoom call in Teams on the version, someone sharing it, and edits are happening left and right and front and center. And this is crossed out. Here's a bubble. Here's a comment. It's really confusing. But you're making me think of maybe a compromise to simply giving edits and pushing it back into someone's email, and the alternative of sitting down with someone. The compromise, or a compromise, might be the annotated comments. And like when I review a paper for journals, especially, I'm very careful to say, this might be my own bugaboo, but I'm really into parallelism. If you said 1, 2, 3, 4 on page 2, when you start on page 4 with 3, I say, well, what happened to 1 and 2? So this kind of symmetry, parallel. So I will make a comment. I'll cut and paste and move something, but I'll say, this is why I'm doing it, because my brain thinks in order. And so if you take me out of order, I get a little kerfuffled. So is that a kind of compromise that makes sense on some things? I can imagine.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I have to admit, comments are one of my hates, and so one of my big bugbears on editing manuscripts, particularly for sending out to sort of middle authors who contributed to the science. They're authors on the paper. They need to see the manuscript. One of the things that I hate to see is people not editing the manuscript but making the comment. And to me, that feels like, well, I have time to raise the problem, but I don't have time to fix it. You fix it. For a lot of people, what I've discovered is that people can feel not empowered to make the edit. So it's something that I hate to see it. I get frustrated by it, but I have learned that I actually have to say to people, no, this is what I would prefer to see. I'd rather you make an edit that I then ignore than you give a cryptic comment that I don't quite know what to do with, and the work is back on my plate.
You're so right.
I love the idea of the edit and the explanatory comment.
Yeah.
In general, comments are something I have trouble with. But I think that the other sort of side of it, I think this would be a more efficient way of doing it than sitting side by side. For me, I think there's also, the way we choose to do these things is often so much a reflection of who we are as people. For me, the relational aspect of sitting side by side with somebody and talking them through it is just so much more enjoyable and rewarding, and it's just a better thing for me as a person than the document. And to be on the receiving end of it as well, to sit through and talk to somebody is better than to read the thing in the sideline. I feel like we do enough reading and maybe not enough talking sometimes in science.
But Dr. Edden, I love what you said. I think you said it now 3 times at least. You said sit side by side.
Uh-huh.
And what I think is important about that, literally side by side, and there's psychology about this. There's psychology about literally sitting next to a person versus in front of a person. So I'm envisioning this exercise with you that if I'm a postdoctoral fellow, an early career faculty member, and I have an appointment with Dr. Edden, if I come into your office and we sit at your little table or we sit at your desk, we are by nature and by design in front of each other, face to face. And that can be perceived as confrontational. People can feel defensive. When you look at someone eye to eye, it can be very threatening. I mean, there's psychology. I'm not a psychologist, but I watch a lot of YouTubes. So I feel like I know what I'm saying here. But it was in terms of like dating. I think I saw that. You don't want to sit eye to eye with someone necessarily because it can be threatening. But rather, when you're sitting side by side with someone, you're not gazing or feeling like maybe you're being attacked or searing into somebody's soul. Rather, you're both looking at something, think like a baseball game or a football game. You're spectators. You're both seeing the content on this computer screen. And that is the experience is more collaborative. Like we're in this together. Yeah. We're both watching this thing versus it's you and me. And which one of us is going to stare the other one down? Which one's going to puff up and get bigger? Which one of us is going to feel dumb? So the fact that you say over and over and over again, side by side, implies to me a lot more than even just the science of it. It's relational. And so I think that is what's really important.
Yeah, I think that's true. That there's power in the sort of the shared gaze, the shared focus. And I do think this works. I mean, there's this Zoom is very powerful thing in the pandemic, completely necessary to keep doing things. But I do think this is much better done in a room, as a lot of things are better done in a room. It's better to communicate and to feel through things. The other note I had, sort of reflecting on the prior episode, was that a lot of the fellows in my group are people coming from overseas, and a reasonable fraction of the content of what we're talking about are sort of language notes, or are, okay, this is grammatically fine, but sort of feels a little bit hokey for certain reasons. Maybe I would put it like this. Several languages, so people struggle with articles, like where do we put the, where do we not put an article, where do we put an, where do we put different articles. So these language notes are really powerful. But what I found recently working with some first language English speakers is that for me, the language notes, which are really powerful and are really important part of people's training when they come to the US for fellowships, the language notes are sort of like a gateway to also talk about the scientific writing and my thinking about how we're presenting things, what decisions we're making, how we're structuring the writing in a sort of scientific and sort of English language structure way. And I feel I have found it harder to express those things to people who are first language English speakers sometimes, because I think there is a greater expectation from their side that they already know how to do this thing. They've been speaking English forever, and they've been writing English since college. Right. And I think that there is, we all are more defensive where we feel our strengths are than where we feel our weaknesses are. Mm-hmm. And so, and I, maybe this is all in my mind, but I feel less emboldened to give the sort of the full feedback that I would like to give with people who are first language English speakers. And so maybe that's sort of a new side of this process for me to figure out and to think about as well. But it does change the dynamic somewhat, changes the balance of what you are talking about. It probably changes the balance more to be a greater percentage of my opinions. And often when you're editing things as a senior, your goal is not to destroy the voice of the person that wrote the manuscript. You still want the first author to be there. And I am somebody with some quite strong opinions and quite a formulaic way of, I like to do things in this certain way. And particularly around constructing figures. I love making figures. I love criticizing figures. I have a certain formulaic way of putting them together. And often I struggle with letting people be allowed to make figures in a way that's different than mine, and trying to see, okay, well, is this worse, or is this just different? And telling which is often hard. And the same is true with writing, is when it is high percentage of opinions, I guess you just think about it a little bit more, and you I think it can be maybe a harder sort of harder process to engage with as a kind of a junior person. And always in this, like there is this, like it is if everybody has trust and it's thought of as a training experience, and it's like, I'm trying to make your paper better, you're trying to make your paper better, I'm trying to give you some feedback and help you move forward. If there's trust, this can be enormously valuable. If there isn't trust, or if there isn't sort of receptivity to guidance, then you just have a power dynamic where you've got two people in a room, one of whom is feeling attacked, and the other person is attacking, maybe not intentionally, and so there is also sort of a dependence of the ground has to be laid so that you can enter into this kind of dynamic, or otherwise it can sort of feel off.
Yeah, well, that's why you're such a good mentor, and that's you're talking about good mentorship and good teaching, and that's why you are so good at what you're doing, Dr. Richard Edden. And I want to underscore what, from my perspective, what you're talking about is this being very intentional and thoughtful about the developmental stage of the mentee, or the person that you're coaching, or the person that you're advising, and knowing that while you said, I have a routine, I have a pattern, I like the way I work, I like to do figures this way, this is the way I think, sometimes putting that aside and being thoughtful about, okay, Kim, I'm meeting with Kim now in 10 minutes. Oh, that's right. She's trying to get her first K. She, I think, wants to get a little bit more confident around this, that, or the other. So that kind of thoughtfulness about not steamrolling over, like, listen, this is the way I do things. Trust me, I got you. And maybe in a crunch time, you would kind of pull that kind of trust me card. But your process seems very developmental, very grounded in good educational concepts of meeting the learner where they are and being sensitive to what works for them. Because some of your trainees might love that 6 a.m. email with the edits, with a couple of bullet point notes, and they might click and get it. That's right. He did mention that last time. I forgot to do that. That makes sense. Others might want more of the shoulder to shoulder. Can we go through that? I'm not quite sure what you mean. So that to me is symbolic of good mentorship, and reminds all of us, I think, that when we enter into these relationships, and as you talk about them, they are, certainly from your perspective, I'm putting words in your mouth, they're transformational relationships. They're not necessarily transactional. That for the future growth of the learner, that it has to be customized to some degree.
Yeah, for sure. And for me, like I think a lot about the postdoctoral fellowship as sort of a big thing as part of this director role that I have in our department. And so much of science relies on people at this career stage when they are very highly trained, bright, at this early career stage, where they are still moving forward, building their CVs to get towards a faculty role. We are, as faculty, heavily reliant on people at these earlier career stages. And it can be easy for the benefit to flow more in one direction than in the other direction. So sometimes through malice and sometimes through lack of thought, that relationship can be transactional and to the greater benefit of the senior person, and the junior person benefits by getting a salary and by getting tricked to come into work for another year and push sales around or something. And I think that we really have to think about the postdoctoral fellowship. We really have to believe in the idea of it as a professional training stage, and not just think of it as sort of a
assembly
job.
line. Yeah.
And to I think we owe it to our people to invest in them, to continue to invest our time in their training, not just to get the benefits of their hard work.
Yeah, that's great. Great stuff. Well, Richard, this is nice and sweet and short, and I promised you I wouldn't go on and on and on, although I could always pontificate and explore the deep recesses of your mind and kind of try to get all the wisdom I can out of it. I do appreciate you being on the podcast again. And, the podcast is all around the world. We have over 200 countries and many, many hundreds of thousands of listeners, and they come on the podcast to learn from people like you. What might you say to postdoctoral fellows or people thinking about entering academic medicine, people just dipping their toe in an academic medicine? What could you impart with them to give them confidence, inspire them around the writing process?
Yeah, so I mean, I really think this co-editing idea is it's an early career idea. It's something that I adopted early in my career, and I think the wonderful thing about that early career, early faculty phase is that your interests as a junior faculty are so perfectly aligned with the interests of your one or two students or faculty or students or fellows within your group. And when you are first starting out with a group of one, you cannot succeed without them succeeding. They cannot succeed without you succeeding. And so you are sitting side by side in everything. And this paper is the same. The whole package, you are tied together. And then when you get to 20 years further forward and you are very senior and you have a group of 10 and you have substructures within your groups, or you have like a pyramid system, and you're on 30 faculty committees in the university and this society thing and that society thing, and you have a personal history of 20 other fellows coming through your group, you do not have the time, the shared time to develop the same kind of relationships at that stage of your career. And your success is no longer contingent on the success of individual juniors. And so I really think that, it is a challenging time, junior faculty. People feel a lack of security, that big sense of, oh, will my ideas pan out? It is really hard in a lot of ways, but there are some real positives, and that sense of, pulling together at those early phases is something that you do get to miss later on. And the relationships I have with my first fellows who are now faculty in other places, these are very special relationships. I continue to try and build a relationship with fellows now. I love my group. I'm not saying that there is anything lacking there, but there is sort of an additional benefit to being at that early stage. And I tell junior faculty that I mentor to really sell this advantage when trying to recruit, because you want to recruit good people. You want to have people coming in who are going to get stuff done. You want to recruit people who could also go and work for Professor Bigwig. Mm-hmm. And I say to, I sort of advise people, I say, you can say to people, you can admit the disadvantages to working with someone junior, but you can also be very forthright in saying, no, there's also huge advantages, because you will have my full attention, because I cannot be successful without you being successful. And so we will move forward together. And that can be very powerful for both sides of the relationship.
So important. I love it. Critical. That is really, really wonderful insight. So important. I hope people heard that and share that perspective. That's oftentimes, I think, fellows and trainees will seek out the professor bigwigs off the bat and then are sorely disappointed in she has no time for me. He's never available. So that is really profound. I hope anyone listening to this podcast will get a hold of someone at Zoom and take Richard Edden's idea and develop some kind of a hologram effect where we can be sitting side by side on Zoom. And you're thinking, well, we're already looking at each other. No, we're looking at each other face to face. If we could somehow flip the perspective of Zoom such that, especially when we're working on shared documents, I could be sitting here in my space or in a conference room, and Richard is right next to me, and we're both looking and gazing, and we look at each other. It's like we're in a room. I think that would be incredible to for the psychology of relationships. So I really appreciate you being on the podcast again, Richard. As usual, terrific wisdom, insight, and thank you so much.
Thank you very much for having me again.
Podcast producer Casey Callahan here. Just wanted to make sure you were reminded that our newest Faculty Factory book, The Academic Medicine Starter Kit, Timeless Tips and Guidance for Early Career Faculty Members, is now available by visiting facultyfactory.org. You can find it on the home page there. I also wanted to remind you that this podcast that you're listening to, as of September 2024, has had nearly 89,000 total downloads and more than 15,000 total YouTube views. Faculty Factory website has drawn more than 49,000 web visits from users in 122 different countries, and we'd like to invite you to be a guest on our show. So please visit facultyfactory.org, send us a message there, or reach out to the show directly, facultyfactorykim@gmail.com. Please reach out there if you'd like to be a guest or to nominate someone in our academic medicine community to be a guest on our show.
Thanks for tuning in to Faculty Factory Podcast. The mission of the Faculty Factory is to build and support a community of leaders in faculty development who share tools, resources, wisdom, and encouragement in service to our faculty members, schools, and institutions. We encourage you to go to facultyfactory.org to find out more. Get in touch with me, ask me any questions. Maybe you want to be interviewed on the podcast. Thanks for tuning in to Faculty Factory Podcast. We'll see you next time. The Faculty Factory podcast and website is sponsored by the Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine Office of Faculty. For more information, visit facultyfactory.org.